Nice large group here that everybody's logged in and we're all connected and good to go. Thank you and welcome to our Citron Global January webinar. Citron Global is proud to present a special program today, Copyright Laws and Leadership, delivered by industry expert Lesley Harris. Before we start, just a couple of minor housekeeping items for you. For the quality of the audio throughout this session, we will keep the lines on mute. But there will be opportunity for you to ask questions via the chat message and facility to be answered by Lesley at the end of the session. And we're also delivering this session to you today using GoToWebinar and their technology. So we are reliant upon their mercy to a certain extent. But if there are any issues with the audio or the video, then again, please let us know via the chat and we'll do our very best to address those in a timely fashion for anybody during the course of the presentation this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. The session will also be recorded, and we'll be distributing the recording of the session for you and your convenience, and being able to share that with colleagues after the session also. So today is a slightly different format from our regular webinar program. As I mentioned already, we have the industry expert guest speaker along with us today. So that being the case, we may well have some new attendees along. So let me just set the scene for you, those of you that don't really know too much about Citron, just a 1-minute introduction really as to who we are, and a little bit of background really as to what we are and who we are. Let me just sort of screen out there. So Citron Global is a library, knowledge and information management solution provider, headquartered in sunny San Diego, just outside of sunny San Diego, Carlsbad, California, with also office locations in Vancouver, Canada, and also on the east coast of the States and further afield in Europe and Australasia. Working with special corporate libraries, information professionals in the types of organizations that you can see there. And how we help those types of organizations is through delivery of discovery platform, archive management system, knowledge management systems, and traditional library information management systems. For anybody that might like to find out more information about us, there's a wealth of information available for you and for your browsing via our website, which is citronglobal.com. And there's also contact points on there for you should you choose to reach out and have any questions about us and what we do. But in terms of our main event, let's lead into why we're all here. We're very privileged and welcome and happy to have Lesley Harris along with us this morning and this afternoon. Lesley will deliver an informative short session over the next sort of 20-25 minutes for us, with an opportunity for you also to ask questions at the end of the session. Lesley's a well-respected and well-known within her sphere expert on copyright, published author, very active blogger, an educator, and also author and primary delivery mechanism, as it were, for the training courses that are available via copyrightlaws.com, including a copyright certificate program, actually, which is just due to start next month. So as a welcome and as a thank you for all the attendees in this particular webinar, you will each receive a discount code, a promotional code, should you or any of your colleagues be interested in participating in that course. That will be made available to you at the end of the webinar, and of course also in follow-up as we move through at the time, and we share the information with you afterwards. But at this point, let me, without too much further ado, hand across to our main speaker, the reason why we're all here. Lesley, please, the floor is yours, and if you'd like to take us through the next session, we all very much look forward to the information that you're about to share with us. Thank you, Lesley, it's all yours.
Okay. All right, no problem. Well, thank you, Michael and Tony and Citron, for inviting me today to speak to my favorite group of copyright people, librarians. It's our first time working with Citron, and we're excited to be here today and to overlap with our wonderful audience. So today's topic, we're going to talk about copyright essentials for corporate librarians. Next. Really what we're focusing on today is lowering your risk of copyright infringement. And really that's through various tips and information I'll be providing for copyright compliance. Next. It wasn't easy to pick some items and any particular number of items, but I have come up with 7 things I'd like to share with you today that I think every corporate librarian needs to know when it comes to copyright law. Next. So let's start. And these are numbered to make it easy for you to follow along. First, U.S. copyright law, and in fact, most copyright laws around the world, or possibly all of them, does not protect ideas. Copyright law doesn't protect ideas, facts, history, news, information. It just protects the exact expression of those ideas. So, for example, the words used to express an idea. So what does that mean to you as librarians? It means you can take any article and you can summarize it. So you may not have permission to reproduce it, to copy and paste it, to print it and distribute it to a group of people, but you can always summarize it and you can always link to it. Similarly, with a photograph or any sort of image, you can link to that image if you don't have permission to use it. Though I will say, as a tip within a tip, it's best not to embed images unless you have permission to do so. Next. So my second point I want to get across today is that copyright protection in the U.S., and in fact in 176 countries around the world, is automatic. So it's automatic once a work is created. Once I write a book on my computer and save it somehow, even if it's automatically saved on my hard drive, once I write a poem on tree bark, that's also automatically protected by copyright. You don't need to register the work, and we'll talk more about registration in a moment. And you don't need to use the C in a circle, which you see on many copyright protected works. So what does that mean? Well, from your perspective, it may mean you may find an article or an image or a map or table that you find online, and you, or perhaps your researchers or patrons or professionals that you work with, may think, oh, well, there's no copyright symbol. It's not protected by copyright. Well, it is, or it may be, and you always have to assume that any sort of content you're using, whether it's video, audio, any sort of music, all the content we find online, especially on social media, that it is protected by copyright with or without a copyright symbol on it. Next. So I just said that you don't need the copyright symbol on a work for a work to automatically be protected by copyright. Similarly, under the current U.S. copyright law, and I say current because this wasn't always the case, you don't need to register a work with the U.S. Copyright Office or elsewhere for that work to be protected by copyright. Now, if you're creating content and you're commercially exploiting that content, you probably do want to register the work. You can easily do so for a reasonable fee on the site, all online through the U.S. Copyright Office. And if you ever have to enforce your rights, you'll then have a presumption of copyright ownership, and also certain benefits, including legal fees, lawyers' fees and related fees, which the infringer would have to pay if you ever have to pursue your rights in a lawsuit. So that's if you're creating work. If you're using work, how handy is the U.S. Copyright Office if registration is voluntary? I think it's still a very helpful and good first place to look if you're looking for a copyright owner. If you easily found that work, then there's a good chance, found the work itself, there's a good chance that that copyright owner registered the work and that you may find more information out about the copyright owner through the registers with the U.S. Copyright Office. But again, just because you don't find something registered in the Copyright Office doesn't mean it's not protected by copyright. So a theme here that you're probably hearing is that copyright protection is automatic, and when you see a work or want to use a work, or one of your researchers wants to use a work, always assume that it's protected by copyright until and unless you find out otherwise in doing your copyright research. Next. So copyright is a limited right. It doesn't last forever. There's several different rules of copyright duration. The general rule is that copyright lasts 70 years after an author's death. So it's a pretty long time. And it wasn't always 70 years in the U.S. It gradually got up to that level. And the latest, it was until 1998, life plus 50. And the latest revisions through what some people know as the Mickey Mouse Copyright Extension Act, so that's not its official name, in 98 extended copyright to life plus 70. Now, because in the U.S. the duration of copyright has changed so many times, and sometimes some works that went into the public domain actually came back out, it can be very confusing as to what's protected or what the length is for certain works and what's in the public domain and not. And there are a couple handy charts online. You can look through, for instance, through the American Library Association has a good chart, and others that really set out the duration of copyright depending when the work was created, whether it went out of copyright, whether it came back into copyright. All that to say, it's not straightforward, though perhaps nothing in copyright law is. The international norm is actually life plus 50. So something may be protected in the U.S. since we're life plus 70 and not be protected in another country, which is still life plus 50. That makes things a little complicated as well. So the way international copyright law works is that you apply the law in the country where the work is being used. So if you are based in the U.S., you always apply the life plus 70 general rule. Next. How many times have you tried to locate a copyright owner and you just haven't been able to? Or perhaps you know the copyright owner and you've sent them many emails, letters, and they just don't reply. In that case, you have what's called an orphan work or an unlocatable copyright owner. In the U.S., even if you try to locate or send a note to a copyright owner 100 times and can't reach them, that doesn't provide you with an excuse or a defense under the U.S. Copyright Act to use that work. You still, in principle, need permission. And that's something you have to think about as corporate librarians. It's not just the letter of the law, but what you should do and can do in terms of looking at copyright as a risk management issue. For instance, if you try and get permission from a copyright owner and you try and you cannot get permission, are you comfortable then using that work? Does that become something, a risk that you're willing to take? And notice I'm using the word risk because, again, there's nothing in the U.S. copyright law that says you can use the work if you've put in reasonable effort to locate that copyright owner or to request permission. Now, other countries do have provisions for what we call unlocatable copyright owners. For example, in the UK and in Canada. And the U.S. Has looked at implementing something similar over the years, but to date, we still don't have anything. But that's an issue you may want to keep your eye out for. But just to repeat, think of copyright management, permissions, even applying fair use, which we'll talk about in a moment. Think of all of these things as copyright risk management. Look at the policies that you have for other areas of the law, for other regulations. How do you apply those particular policies to your day-to-day work? Well, think of copyright in the same way. It's not clear-cut, so you always have to think about, well, what's the reasonable thing to do? What are the risks that we're encountering if we don't follow the letter of the law? And, of course, what is your legal counsel going to say about this, and what's practical to do in the circumstances? Next. Works that are in the public domain are works in which the copyright either never existed or the copyright has expired. So life plus 70 in the U.S., 70 years after the after the death of an author, the duration of copyright expires and the work comes into the public domain, or PD, we often say. So once the work is in the public domain, you may do whatever you wish with that work. You can adapt it, you can use it without having the author's name on it. You could change a colored film into a black and white film. So it's no longer protected by copyright. In the U.S., government works, so those created by government employees, do not have copyright protection. So they are always in the public domain. So if there's a brochure, a research paper, a map, a table that was created by a U.S. government employee, you are free to use those works in any manner. You do have to be careful that not everything that the government has or has been created for the government is free of copyright. So if you're a consultant and you create a research paper for the government, you can then assign the copyright in that research paper to the government. And in that situation, the U.S. government can own copyright works. So when you're using government works, you do have to do a little research and determine, well, was it created by a government employee or was it created by an independent consultant, and the government does actually own the copyright in the work. Next. Fair use. So if you've read anything about copyright, then you've probably heard about fair use. Fair use is probably one of the most ambiguous areas of copyright law, especially when it comes to librarians, because librarians are often the ones who are responsible for tunneling content and information and making sure others are compliant with copyright law. Fair use can be applied by a variety of people and institutions, not just librarians, and commercial and non-commercial entities, for-profit and non-profit organizations can all apply fair use to their situations. Fair use is set out I'll say it's clearly set out. I mean, there's words in the Act, in the U.S. Copyright Act, Section 107, if you want to Google it and read a little more. And basically, Section 107 states that fair use of a copyrighted work isn't an infringement of copyright for purposes such as, so notice these are just examples: criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, including multiple copies for classroom use, scholarship, and research. So those are examples of things that may be fair use. Fair use applies to all sorts of works. whether text or images or video, music. And the Act also states that in determining, notice in determining, because it then becomes up to you as a librarian to make a determination whether your specific situation falls within the fair use factors. There are 4 factors set out in the Copyright Act. The purpose, first, the purpose and character of the use, including if the use is for commercial nature or nonprofit educational purpose. Second, the nature of the copyright work. Third, the amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the original work. And I should say, there is nothing in the U.S. Copyright Act that sets out an actual percent. And that's a question I'm often asked. Can we use 1%, 3%, 10%? It depends. You have to look at all the factors. There is no exact percentage set out in the U.S. Copyright Act. Those numbers often come from industries. Certain industries are comfortable with making those judgment calls, and sometimes organizations have policies. But generally, you have to apply the 4 factors to each specific situation. And the 4th factor is the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. So basically the competition with the original work. Understanding these fair use factors can be a little tricky. To me, one of the best resources is the U.S. Copyright Office. They have what's called the Fair Use Index. And this index, you can search by jurisdiction, category of work, literary, artistic, musical, for example, and by your type of use. So it could be internet, digitization, research, education, and you can search by these various categories, and you can find cases at all levels. So, of course, the Supreme Court cases would be the ones that are most important, but often you can review and read various cases and get just a real good feeling for what may be fair use or not. One thing people don't understand, especially in the corporate for-profit world, is that fair use may apply to corporate libraries just as it does to, let's say, academic libraries. You just have to go through the 4 fair use factors and make your own judgment call. Again, a risk management issue. And with fair use, no matter where you're applying to it, you're never really sure unless, and hopefully this won't happen, you go before a judge in a court of law. So those are my main points. Next, I'm happy to open the floor to questions that you may have today about copyright, fair use, perhaps even licensing, and of course about the Copyright Leadership Certificate Program.
Thank you, Lesley. We have had a small number of questions come through. So anybody else in the audience that might like to take this opportunity to update the chat box, please do so and send us any questions whilst we address those that we've already received. The information there available to you, and also the discount code, should that be of interest to you. And I'll just let Lesley finish off with anything else that she might like to say at the end. But Lesley, thanks ever so much for that fascinating insight there.
Thank you again, Michael and Sutron, for having me as part of the show today. I think the questions that we received today are all in the types of questions also that we discuss in the certificate program. And I thank you all for taking the time to listen in today.
I just echo that. Thanks ever so much, everybody, for joining us. We'll do our best to follow up with you and just to get some feedback on the session. And if there were any remaining questions that we did not address, then we'll make sure that we do so. And we'll be in touch certainly. But thank you, Lesley. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we wish you all a very good day. Thanks ever so much. Bye bye.